Good afternoon here in Israel. Good morning, everyone in Denver. We have a 9 hours difference of time, and I'm glad to be here today. Of course, the circumstances have changed. I was supposed to come to Denver in May 1st, but we have a new situation worldwide, unfortunately, with the corona crisis. But I'm glad that we can implement our plans in a different format. And I hope that you will get to see this recorded lecture in the meantime, so that in May 1st, we will continue by Zoom so that we can discuss and raise points when we meet via Zoom. So as you can see, I'm Sagi-Schwartz, and actually we are going to talk about lessons from around the world in this international workshop on attachment and culture. As you can see on the first slide, you can see my city, Haifa, and you can see the beautiful Haifa Bay. Of course, I would like to thank Jean, Jose, and Jane in association with the Colorado Association of Infant Mental Health. Thank you for organizing this meeting and this event. For Jane, the photo of the Haifa Bay is familiar. She visited with us, and of course, we look forward for further visits in the future. So, what I would like, before I begin with this presentation, I hope that you will get also PowerPoint and a few documents and video clips that I'm sharing with you, so that you can look into it before we meet in May 1st to further supplement our discussion. So let me see what we are going to do, the plan of the webinar. What I would like to do is to share with you some basic principles of attachment theory, why and how we become attached, then to share with you some cross-cultural aspects of attachment theory, and then to end with some practice implications. Let me just stop for a while. Sorry, I just would like to make sure that the volume is right so that you can hear me well. Yeah, okay, so we can continue now. And just to start, I guess you are very familiar with John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory. And of course, less known than Bowlby is Mary Ainsworth, but she was a very close colleague, and actually to a large extent, what we learn, what we can see is thanks to the collaborative work between John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. Actually, a very important features of attachment theory. The first one is the importance of real events and their impact on the development of psychopathology. I would like to make important point about it. Bowlby was a psychoanalyst in training in the UK, and of course, he got exposed to all these ideas that many children may have fantasies about all kinds of events in their life, but he truly believed about the importance of real events rather than fantasies and their impact on the development of psychopathology. He also talked about the importance of early attachment and its impact on later emotional development. And then associated with it is the meaning of separation and loss. And not less important, Bowlby, as a psychoanalyst who did not get extensive training in research, believed so much in the scientific approach that we need evidence base for all kinds of claims and hypotheses. One thing that I like so much, and it's the base of his theory, Bowlby, is well-known saying that mother love in infancy is as important for mental health as are vitamins and proteins for physical health. I think this is, really amazing, and it's in the heart of attachment theory. We should remember, Bowlby was a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, so he had quite knowledge about the role of vitamins and proteins, and he could have made this wonderful, and he made this wonderful analogy between the need for vitamins and proteins, physical health, and the need for mother love as part of mental health. And that's going to follow alongside many, many ideas that we are going to discuss today. So what is attachment? I guess the best way is to use a very nice and clarifying statement made by Bowlby. And he says, to say of a child that he is attached to or has attachment to someone means that he is strongly disposed to seek proximity to and contact with a specific figure, and to do so in certain situations, notably when the child is frightened, tired, or ill. I guess this is a very strong statement, and this is in the heart of attachment theory. Not less important is the claim of Bowlby that we have an innate bias to become attached to a primary caregiver, and this is regardless of the specific cultural niche. I want to emphasize that because the second part of my presentation is going to be about cross-cultural aspects of attachment theory, and here we already see in the opening that actually the specific cultural context doesn't necessarily has to play a major role. We'll talk about it later. He was heavily influenced, Bowlby, as I indicated, by scientific empirical evidence. So he was heavily influenced by Harry Harlow from the United States, University of Madison. No, not Madison, University of, in Madison, Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin in Madison. And Harry Harlow was only one person who influenced Bowlby, but I would like to focus today on this one because I guess it's going to be very compelling. Because Harlow talked in his studies about with monkeys about the role of proximity, cuddling, and contact maintaining. And we have here, these beautiful photos showing the meaning of contact and cuddling. What we can see is, and I guess you may know, or further, exposure and studies about this, amazing experiment, but I would like to mention it here briefly, is, the study of Harry Harlow with the mother surrogates he used to raise infant monkeys. And actually he used two types of surrogate mothers. One on the right side is a terry closed mother, and on the bottom side is a bare wire mother. And he was trying to show that monkey under certain frightening circumstances will prefer, of course, the terry closed mother. And so here we can see, and this is in association with Harry Harlow, famous writing about the nature of love, how the infant monkey is clinging to its very close mother. And this is, it was done, and he got evidence for that by using in his experiment a typical fear stimulus. This is the typical fear stimulus that you can see in this slide. And actually what he did the following experiment. This is just a brief video clip that will show you very clearly and in a very compelling way how the monkey, while exposed to the fear stimulus, would prefer the very close mother. Let me see, just I got confused here with the buttons. Okay, so we can see the monkey being exposed to the fearful stimulus, and he's getting away from this frightening. And here we have the very close mother, and he hugs the mother, tries to get comfort, and then he get exposed to the bare wire mother with food. He has a piece of food down there, and he avoids it. He is not interested because he's frightened. This is, I guess, very compelling. We can talk a lot about it, but it was part of the kind of evidence that Harlow needed in order to develop his attachment theory. Okay, another thing that I would like to mention, and I like it very much, comes from Bowlby as well, that it's not only during infancy, but actually if we use the following quotes of Bowlby, all of us, from cradle to the grave, are happiest when life is organized as a series of excursions, long or short, from a secure base provided by our attachment. I think this is amazing, and we should all, we all know how to appreciate the fact that it goes above and beyond our early childhood and even into adulthood and late adulthood. And let me just, use a very simple example, even though it's not very useful nowadays with the corona, but we fly, we go to excursions. We leave the country. I leave the country and I go to the United States. I go to Europe. I go to Asia, to do some exploration, to enjoy on a holiday. And we shut down the phone during the flight. What do? The first thing that we land, we activate the phone, and usually the first thing we do, we send a message to a beloved one in our home, just to make sure that we are in contact. So we always need this kind of contact, and Bowlby would provide all kinds of explanations from an attachment point of view. Now, a very important element, which is an antecedent of attachment, is caregiver sensitivity. And actually, Mary Ainsworth, the collaborator, close collaborator of Bowlby, actually talked a lot about it and investigated it quite extensively. And actually, Mary Ainsworth, when she looks into caregiver sensitivity, she identifies various components: warmth, responsiveness, timing, flexibility, acceptance, and the capability to cope with conflicts. Now, very important point. When we have, we can see in this slide, when we have available relationships, there will be always an attachment, always. This is well proven, okay? Once a child has available relationships, I'm still not talking about the quality of the relationships, but just relationships, the child will get attached to that particular figure. The second aspect is not only the availability of the relationships, but the quality of relationships. Primarily, to what extent we can identify sensitivity versus lack of sensitivity. This will determine the quality of the attachment. If we identify sensitive relationships, it's more likely that the child will end up with secure attachment. If lack of sensitivity, insecure attachment. One more point that it's very important, and I put the label danger. Danger is lack of availability of relationships, in which case the child will end up with lack of attachment and or distortion in attachment. Usually it will be in the context of institutions. Sorry. So children become attached to primary caregivers, always. This is quite proven. Always will get attached to primary caregivers. And as I've indicated, when the child experiences sensitive parenting, will end up more likely to end up with secure attachment relationships. When exposed to insensitive parenting, more likely to end up with insecure attachment relationships. This slide is a nice integration of attachment theory made by a very well-known group. You could see here in the slide, I point to it, Cooper, Hoffman, Marvin, and Powell, and they call it the circle of security. And they made a very nice figure showing what happens when the caregiver is attending to the child's needs. In other words, being sensitive. Okay, so what we have two hands, and actually, which is a person, the caregiver, and actually one hand is a secure base, and as we know, children have the drive to explore the environment, so the child is going away, but as the child goes away, attachment system is being activated, and the child says, I need you to support my exploration. And then he goes a little bit farther. And you could see this metaphorically, as if, the child climbs over a barrier. And as he climbs over the barrier, he says again, please watch over me, help me, and also enjoy with me. And the child at a certain point goes back because the child cannot be too long away. And actually, he would go back in order to get some fueling from a safe haven, what Bowlby called. Here we started with a secure base as a base for exploration, and this is going to be a safe haven. And the child on the way say, I need you to please welcome my coming to you, accept me. And the child comes closer and says, please protect me, comfort me, delight in me, and organize my feelings. That's a very, very crucial point, to organize the feelings. And the major point is always, always be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. And whenever possible, follow my child's need. And whenever necessary, take charge, make a decision. I cannot make a decision. You make a decision for me. So I think this is wonderful. I don't have too much time, even though, in the recording, I could go long and long and long, but I don't make this presentation too long. So imagine I could send you some references that they have also pictures or diagrams of circle of limited security. But here I presented you with a typical circle of security when the caregiver attends to the child's needs. Now, what I would like to do with you a nice exercise. The same people here down below, Cooper, Hoffman, Marvin, and Powell, what they did, they developed a nice film. Just take a look, and it's called The Shark Music. And I'm going to explain to you in a minute why it was called Shark Music. So just, you know, take a look, listen carefully. It's not long, and see what do you feel about what you're going to observe. Okay, now wait and look into the second um, presentation. Okay, I guess this is a wonderful example of what happens when we get exposed to wonderful, spectacular landscape, while in the background we have a beautiful harmonic music compared in the second event when we get exposed to very noisy and unpleasant music, which is not in harmony with the landscape. And actually, what they try to show us here, and they call it shark music, because this wonderful group, that is, by the way, they are situated in Spokane, state of Washington. They conduct therapeutic, psychological therapeutic intervention. And one mother told while she was trying to describe her difficulties with dealing with her baby, she said, "Oh, now I can hear a shark music." And the idea was that there is something from her background, her history, which actually invades the beautiful landscape. And the landscape is a child, actually. And the music is something from her history, or if you if you may use, the ghost in the nursery of Selma Freiberg, like, invading the interaction between mother and child. And that's how they uh, actually adopted the notion of shark music, which came from a client in treatment. And actually, what they tell us is that when there is no shark music, actually beautiful harmonic music with the landscape, mother can recognize the baby's needs and read the baby's skills, which means that she can be sensitive. So actually, behind the capacity to be sensitive, we need kind of clean mind with no interruptions, with no sharp music, if we can use this kind of metaphor. But when suddenly mom starts paying attention to the shark music, actually the baby's needs and cues start to disappear from her view. It's as if here we have the shark music and the baby cries and needs attention, but there is kind of a disruption. She cannot communicate with the baby and she becomes insensitive. This is very critical. We don't have today time to talk about it, but we can talk about it in the session in May 1st about how we assess the capacities of adults and when we might see shark music invading compared to a situation where the mother or father, whoever is a caregiver, will not be affected by this kind of interferences. Here I have another nice example of the circle of security, a real one. We call it the circle of security, the Boulder Boy, believe it or not, but it comes from your state, Colorado, in Boulder. And actually what you could see something which is not in the laboratory, but something really natural going on in a shopping center in Boulder. You can see a father and a child, and you could see in this piece how the child is exploring how he is exploring the shopping center, which is part of his nature to explore, and at the same time would seek the father as a safe haven to address his increasing concerns and anxieties while he is exploring the environment. So let's take a look. I think this is very wonderful example. No, I guess something happened. I'm sorry, I have to go back. Something jumped. Okay, this is it now. What I can tell you, this father probably got some kind of intervention and guidance. You can see nicely the going back. Okay, I hope that this was a very nice example of the circle of security, of the balance between exploration and seek for contact, and how one feeds each other. Here I'm not going to show it to you now. Actually, I sent you video clips of the well-known strain situation that was developed by Mary Ainsworth. And this is a system of assessing the quality of attachment, where we end up with a classification of infants into secure versus insecure attachments. And you could look at this video clip, and then you get a better sense of how it works and what are the kinds of types of secure versus insecure infants. I'd like to make one more note about a very particular type of thing which may happen between a parent and a child. Hopefully it's not very frequent, but it happens. Actually, a situation where we have frightened or frightening parental behavior, and actually it comes from the adult to the infant, and then actually what happens, we actually see a parent-child interaction paradox, where on the one hand, the parent is supposed to be the source of safety, and we could see a smiley face here. And at the same time, the same parent may become source of fear, and then the child cannot stand it. And there is a conflict between, because it's the same person who is supposed to be the source of safety, and at the same time is he or she is the source of face. And then we might experience a collapse of attachment strategies in the child. I mention it because it may be related to situation of maltreatment and to all kinds of extreme experiences of young children. And actually what we see here situations where when we have absence of support in the environment, like non-functioning adults, schools and communities, and then it might happen that children cannot depend on the caregiver's trust and security. The children then may withdraw and show insecure, disorganized behaviors. And Main and Hesse actually has coined a vicious circle of what they call fright without solution. The child doesn't know what to do because the child cannot turn to the attachment figure, because the attachment figure is in itself the fearful object for the child. And actually, she developed, and this is in the context of the strain situation that you will see in the video clips. You are not going to see a clip of a disorganized child because for privacy reason, I cannot share it. But what I would like to mention is that actually the basic definition is that these infants show momentary absence of an organized strategy for dealing with their separation distress and mother's return. And actually it looks like that. A child who is in that situation that you will see in the video clip will say, I need you, but you are so frightened or frightening that I have no one to turn to and I don't know what to do. And think about what you see now, the same child, it's not many children, but the same child like is going around of himself, not knowing what to do. We can see it in many of the video clips that we videotape with disorganized children. Okay, so that was the first section. I gave you some orientation to basic ideas of attachment theory. I would like to move to the second part, which is cross-cultural validity of attachment theory. actually a lot is mentioned in this chapter, in this book. It's the Handbook of Attachment, actually already the third edition, which I'm very happy about it. Over the past 20 years, people got, very interested in many chapters. So you have here the picture of the book, and you may look into this book. And actually, we have this chapter about cross-cultural patterns of attachment. And actually, I send it to you so you can look into this chapter. It's quite extensive, and it deals with many aspects of cross-cultural research associated with attachment, some of which I'm going to share with you now. And whenever I find it difficult to explain here, because the figures are quite complicated, you can turn into the chapter which is in your hand. So actually, just to mention, when we talk about cross-cultural aspects of attachment, that, despite the fact that Mary Ainsworth, the major founder of attachment theory, was Canadian-American, basically she's Canadian, but she became American, so from North America. For some personal reasons, she moved to the UK, and that's how she got to know John Bowlby. And actually, the first study that was done on attachment is summarized in the well-known book called Infancy in Uganda, and that's how Mary Ainsworth developed many of her ideas and research to follow later on. So actually, this was the first cross-cultural study of attachment, and it was very important for Mary Ainsworth to mention it all the time, because you see, most of attachment research at the beginning evolved in the United States, and she was American, as I mentioned. And when cross-cultural research started to emerge, she always mentioned to us, remember, my work was the first cross-cultural work, which is true, of course. Okay, so what I would like to tell you now, that cross-cultural validity of attachment theory comes from evidence from all the continents, actually, from Africa, from Southeast Asia, from the USA, from Europe, and Israel. And you will see all of it in the chapter that you have. Okay, now what I would like to share with you quickly is about 5 core hypotheses of attachment theory. One is universality. And the meaning behind universality is that in Western countries, and I emphasize, before we did cross-cultural research in Western countries, all infants become attached to one or more specific caregivers. I actually refer to it when I gave the idea of availability of attachment figures and the fact that always there will be an attachment ending up. Okay, this is a figure which is very difficult to read now, but if you go to the book, you will see that this figure shows all the hypotheses about attachment theory. You will see universality, normativity, sensitivity, and competence. And you can see it across the globe in all the countries with explanations of the black, white, and other boxes. And you can see it in the book, in the chapter more clearly. But basically, what we find is, and this is in the context of the question, is universality thesis insensitive to culture-specific influences? And what I can tell you, and if you go back to that figure, is that attachment is a very robust phenomenon, and attachment actually measures, the measures that we have around attachment are flexible enough to cover various culturally specific behaviors. And this is a very complicated methodological issue, of course. And actually, all the measures and all we know constitute the universal patterns of attachment. So we have evidence for the universality hypothesis. The second one, which is not necessarily mentioned in the book, but I use it as one more core hypothesis. And actually, you will see in the next slide who contributed to this kind of hypothesis, is what we call the attachment exploration balance. And actually, we could see it actually in the Boulder Boy, in the film that we just showed in the shopping center, how the child seeks for a balance between the need for proximity and the need for exploration. Child was a wonderful explorer and at the same time was a wonderful proximity seeker, and there was a wonderful harmony between the two with the mediation of the father in between. And actually, we have now proofs for this hypothesis. And actually, in this figure, just briefly speaking, what actually the people who contributed to this hypothesis are the Grossmans, Klaus Grossman and Karin Grossman from Germany. And actually, what they show here, when they compare between data from Germany and Japan, they show a very similar curves of the child's behavior during the strange situation that you're going to see in the video clips. And actually, when we make further comparisons like that in the graph, we will see very, very similar patterns of behaviors and balance between exploration and attachment behaviors in all the countries. Okay, the next core hypothesis is normativity. And actually, again, based on Western societies, we find that in Western societies, the majority of infants are securely attached in contexts that are not inherently threatening to human health and survival. Okay, so majority of children are secure, which is good news. And actually in this graph, and again, you should go to the chapter, you can see that actually we get support basically for that all over the countries that have been studies in all the continents, and with an explanation about secure, avoidant, resistant, and disorganized attachment in this table that is very difficult to explain now, but in the chapter we'll be able to read more carefully and closely about it. And the next hypothesis is about sensitivity. We talked about it, about the need for sensitive parenting. And actually, as we talked already about it, attachment security is dependent on child rearing antecedents, in particular, sensitive and prompt response to infants' attachment signals. And we could see it again in the wonderful video clips of the Boulder Boy. And also we could see another difference in the shark music of how, you know, there could be harmony between the music behind and the spectacular landscape, and when there is a disharmony between the two. The last hypothesis is competence. And actually what this hypothesis suggests is that secure attachment leads to positive child outcomes in a variety of developmental domains. We talk here about the regulation of negative emotions, like absence of aggression, ego control. We talk about satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers, and cognitive abilities. So again, this graph will provide you a summary of support of all these hypotheses. So basically, we have support for the various hypotheses cross-culturally in so many countries and cultures across the globe. And this is regardless of the specific context in which the children are being raised. We can talk more about it when we meet in May 1st. Now I would like to move into the last section of my presentation and to share with you some selected illustrations for practice in special and unique populations. And again, we can talk more about it when we meet in the forthcoming Zoom session in May 1st. I would like just to say something about autistic children and to mention that they get attached as well. Actually, this is based on a wonderful work of my colleague, David Oppenheim, from University of Haifa and his co-workers. And what they found that children with autism only appear to lack social motivation, okay? So they don't have social motivation, which is part of their autism. But if we go to the next statement, attachment system of children with autism seems to be intact. They found it, and it has been published with very beautiful examples of how it works. Half of the children even form secure attachments, and this is illustrated with young children during separation and reunion observations in the strange situation with the mothers. I wish I could have shown you some example, but again, because of privacy issue, I cannot do it. I have to see if in May 1st, I can do it as long as it will not be, copied and recorded. But we will see. But anyway, that's as far as autistic children. And that's one aspect that I would like to mention about a very special and unique population. That the attachment system works quite well, which is actually good news because we could, use this kind of findings to support and to do some interventions with families of autistic children. Another thing which is completely different is attachment in daycare. It's our research also at the University of Haifa. And what I can tell you is the basic question is, what happens when professional standards of quality of care are not met? Unfortunately, I have to say and admit that the quality of childcare of very young children in Israel is not very high, to say the least. It's a topic in itself, why and how it happens, but it happens. So it serves as a very important ground for research. And actually what you can see here in this graph, when you compare children at 12 months of age, when we assess attachment, security, and insecurity in the strange situation, you can see that you have here children who are in center care, 46%, the red bar, are insecurely attached to the mothers, whereas when you go to the other groups, children raised by mother, children raised individually by a relative, usually mother or aunt, children raised by paid caregiver individually, and children raised in family daycare, which is a small setting, compared with center care, you could see very, these are very typical distributions. Usually we find above 70% of kids in various samples are securely attached to parents. And this is insecure, but here you see a very big jump of insecurity in center care in Israel. And I'll skip this one. You will have it in the graph. And maybe I'll skip this one. Well, here, yeah, I would like to make a mention about ecological constraints of maternal sensitivity. We have to keep in mind, it's not that the mother of our children in center care are not sensitive. They're sensitive, we have evidence for that. But what happens when maternal sensitivity becomes ineffective. That's the point, that it becomes ineffective. So, what happens when maternal sensitivity becomes ineffective? Actually, what we see constraints on maternal sensitivity when basic child care standards are not met. Mother has to deal with the fact that the child is in a low quality care. And actually, we know that as I showed you in the graph, that substantial group of infants suffers when basic standards are not met. Also, just to make parenthetically a note, and this is a topic for discussion itself, and maybe we could discuss it in the Zoom session, still half of the children are resilient. I mean, despite the fact that they are exposed to low quality of care, they are resilient and still remain securely attached to the parents. That's a very interesting finding, and of course, we can discuss it further later on. So what are possible explanations for all that? So it could be the case that the difficulties in childcare actually kind of invades home, invades into the mother capacity to deal with her infant at home. And actually the baby challenges his mother. And then because of all this, because of these two, maternal sensitivity becomes inefficient. So she, to begin with, could be sensitive, but she becomes insufficient. And actually, to some extent, mother sometimes is unaware of the need to compensate and to do something else, which perhaps could be by kind of intervention and counseling, guidance. Okay, so now I would like to move into another example, which is part of my past research, just to mention, and again, I sent, and by the way, sorry, going back to the daycare, I sent you also an article about the daycare findings, so you can look into it and see exactly the findings and what's going on there. And the same about this, what we call the children of the sun. Actually, these are the children who got raised in collective sleep in Israeli kibbutzim, long time ago, which is a kind of experiment in nature. Again, I don't have time to talk about it extensively, but it would be really great. If you wish, we could extend on it when we meet next month. And actually, I sent you a nice paper. It's not the one which is cited here, but it's something that is written in a very friendly manner, friendly user manner, so you may look into it and get some better idea of what we mean by being raised in collective sleeping and why we have what we call the rise and fall of this system. Just briefly, I can tell you that actually we got very much interested to understand when we did this study, what can we learn about the risk of normative children raised at night without the parents? I mean, this is a very critical question because usually when we talk about the risk of children, actually Bowlby, when he did it and when he developed this theory, it was when we talk about children who are to begin with, children at risk, like children who are maltreated, maltreating families, institutions, and stuff like that. But here we have a wonderful example of children who are normative to begin with, because the kibbutz system is a very normative system, not only normative, but even above, because the child rearing conditions during the day are amazing in the kibbutz system. And as I said, we can talk more about it when we meet. But what happened when they are raised at night without the parents? And that was exactly the idea, that at night, the infants did not spend the night with the parents, but spend it with unfamiliar adults. That was part of the system of the kibbutz. So the question then is, what happens when child rearing practice go against what I call the law of nature? Because the law of nature is that children stay at night with their parents or primary caregivers. But here, they did not. So what happens? We take a normative child, we expose the child to something which goes against the law of nature. What happens to the child? Actually, John Bowlby himself made a visit to Israeli kibbutzim in the early 50s. It was just after the Second World War, the Holocaust, and actually he was asked by the World Health Organization to study, to look into the situation of children who got who lost their parents, who got exposed to very difficult traumas, and actually he visited also Israeli kibbutzim, and that was his prediction in the 1950s. He said this child rearing context, though clearly different from institutional care, might produce higher rates of attachment insecurity. And not surprisingly, that's what we found, and I'm going to go back to it shortly. Just would like to show you two clips of adults who got raised themselves in collective sleep, and see what she's saying, this adult, this woman who is now a parent herself. I hope you can read it quickly. So I hope you managed to read the subtitles, because it's in Hebrew, and the next one here, and again, you have subtitles that you can look into. A man saying that he felt like he had no family protection. Okay. So main attachment data is that when no experiment at night takes place, sleeping with the parents at night, all is fine, as we might expect. No negative effects like high quality daycare, when you have high quality daycare, which is the case in the kibbutz system during the day. And I can explain to you again when we meet in May 1st. But children of the sun, by the way, that the metaphoric name that the kibbutz founders gave to their children, is if you know they're going to be the chair of the sun, a nightmare story. Actually, not being with the parents became a nightmare story. And actually, you can see it here. You can see that when you take kibbutzim, children raised in kibbutzim, but with family sleep, that is, they slept with the parents, only 20% are insecurely attached. But when you go to collective sleep or communal sleep, in two studies that we had, here we have 43% insecurity, and here we have 52% security. And you can compare it to the world distribution, which goes from 20% to 35% insecurity. So you can see how clearly being raised in collective or communal sleep, that is being away at night from the parents, ending up with a significant increase in the rate of insecurity. So clearly, this children's nightmare experience was characterized by maternal inaccessibility and non-availability, combined with exposure to many, many unfamiliar adults who naturally were unable to respond promptly and sensitively to their needs. So again, the paper which I shared with you would give you a closer look into this system. So actually, what we see, to summarize this idea of the kibbutz system, that when we look at sleeping away, what we see that sleeping away from the parents at night first limits the effectiveness of sensitive parenting skills, same as we saw with the daycare system, causes inconsistency in caring for different children, and risks clearly attachment security. The last illustration has to do with a large study that we did about 3 generations of the Holocaust. And actually, the study is about attachment and Holocaust, not necessarily attachment, but I would like to, but attachment is a major component here. And again, I shared with you a paper, a chapter about it, a very comprehensive chapter that you can look into it and get more information about all kinds of data that I will mention here today briefly, as well as other data that are beyond the scope of this presentation today. And the big question is, does trauma transfer? When we have the first generation, second generation, third generation, does trauma transfer? So, and of course, again, the question is, what can be learned about the risk of initially normative children living in peace, that suddenly their entire world collapsed without comprehensible reason? We have to remember the children, Jewish children in Europe, came from normative family, but all of a sudden a collapse, a big collapse, which is very difficult to explain to people. And then you know what happens when separation from and loss of attachment figures go against the law of nature. I mean, when we say again, going against the law of nature, we know that the kinds of experiences that children experienced were really insane, completely insane. And again, in the chapter which I shared with you, you could read more about it. But to begin with, we have to understand or to remember that we deal here with children who are initially normative until the Holocaust hit them. And this, we believe, might shed light, understanding all this, might shed light on vulnerability and resilience associated with other genocides and catastrophic life events. So what we find, if we look at, and I don't have time to mention to you the details of this study, and again, you will find all the information in the chapter, but I want to give you highlights. Actually, what we find when we look at trauma-related outcomes, and we go to first generation of the study, first generation means Holocaust survivors, we find significant differences on traumatic stress inventories even after 55 years. We did it 55 years after the Holocaust, and we still see signs of trauma. We see elevated PTSD markers, we see more unresolved loss, and we see more traumatic stress and anxiety. This is at the negative side. But also we find, I'm sorry, no, I didn't include the other slide. You'll see it in the chapter. Now I'm going to the second generation. And the second generation may have two sides to the coin. We could see maybe failure, that is transmission of trauma, or maybe success in child rearing, despite the traumatic experiences. and we can maybe go into all the area of post-traumatic growth. So what we find when we go to the second generation of Holocaust survivors, we see that they do not differ from comparisons on measures of attachment, traumatic stress, and unresolved attachment. So second generation is doing very well. And again, if you read the chapter, you will see the complexity of these studies and the comparison to other studies that have been conducted elsewhere, and you will get a better sense of this finding. And again, I'll be more than happy to discuss it further when we meet in May 1st. And also, we find the second generation that they do not differ from comparisons, also on measures of anxiety, perceived well-being, caregiving of their own mothers, and interaction with their children. That's the second generation. So no traumatic transfer whatsoever to the second generation. And the last finding associated with this is third generation grandchildren, again, do not differ from comparisons on measures of attachment. And we conducted here strange situation assessments on the infants as third generation. So what is the major take-home message of this Holocaust study? Major take-home message is that we find signs of resilience on the part of Holocaust survivors. While on the one hand, we could see still elements of trauma in their life, 55, and we have also another study that you will read in the chapter, then, 70 years later, we see that they still, show indicators of trauma on the one side. On the other side, we see signs of resilience in their capacity to protect, basically, the children. And actually, what we suggest in the chapter and in the studies, that many are able to cope effectively with the after effects of exposure to inhumane trauma and loss. Also, what we can see, that they have the capacity to protect children from being affected by their own trauma and loss. This is an amazing point to discuss, especially for people like you who have a lot of experience with children experiencing trauma. So what might be some plausible explanations for this remarkable resilience? And what can we learn from this complex set of data about attachment theory and trauma? And what might be some directions for healing? Again, this is a talk in itself, but I'm just trying to give you some highlights. So one explanation is that these kids in Europe, actually before the war, had secure emotional infrastructure prior to separation and loss. And this is amazing, and we can talk about it. Also, not always personal experiences or direct witness of traumatizing events, like living in hiding. Many of the children who survived, of course, lived in hiding. Also, very important point when we compare it to maltreating families, that here, trauma was not inflicted by parents or trusted attachment figures, but by anonymous social and destructive forces. That is by the Nazis. And also another point which is critically important, and it plays apparently a big role in the Israeli society, is the role of community social support. We believe that the community social support played and still plays played a very important role and still plays a very important role, even now in this Corona crisis, when we still have Holocaust survivors being isolated and with social distance, and the community social support, which is going on from all around, basically now via zooming in, is playing a very important role. And of course, also, it's something which I like a lot to talk about, not now, is the legitimacy of prolonged grief. We have to remember that people in the trauma area believe and suggest that sometimes, when you have prolonged grief, it may show that you have lack of resolution of the trauma, which is correct. Well, in my extended presentations of the Holocaust study, I say that actually, to a large extent, it's impossible to resolve such a devastating trauma, but still, we can show that these people can find their ways to protect the children. And actually, what they find, and I have many, many amazing stories from Holocaust survivors, saying that actually they need the legitimacy for prolonged grief. They still feel that when they can grieve, even nowadays, it provides a kind of energy, and it empowers them to keep going. We can talk about it again when we meet, if you find it of interest, to use this kind of aspect of the trauma. Last thing that I would like to mention briefly, because I see now that the lecture is quite long, but luckily, it's recorded so you can observe it, in chunks if you wish. Just to mention about catastrophic parental loss during childhood and life in institutions, okay, which is a different, kind of thing. Actually, I would like to share with you kind of a summary. It's what I call risk care. You see, when we go to low-risk population, normative population, we find 25% insecurity, okay? In normative families. So 75% of the children basically are securely attached. Middle risk is like childcare, the one which I shared with you. So about 50% become insecure. This is quite high. When we go to high risk, like maltreatment, 80% end up as insecure. And this is very important to note. Many of them are disorganized in their attachment with the parents. And then we have disaster areas, genocide, HIV, loss, abandonment in institutions. Here we even find profound symptoms and no attachment at all, okay? Because there is lack of attachment, primary caregiving. Okay. Before I end, I would like to share with you something which has to do with the Corona situation. I can talk about a lot about attachment and divorce. We don't have time. As I show you in this slide, much can be said about it. But what I want to share with you something which is very exciting. Corona crisis. We're all, in this Corona crisis, and this is why we record, this lecture. We don't meet in vivo. So just, I found this one, which I find it very nice, just checking on you, saying because social distances does not mean emotional distancing. So we have to keep in mind attachment theory has a great role here to make sure that we maintain emotional contact and we do not go into emotional distancing. And I want to share with you an exciting story, and I call it attachment goes to the Israeli government. We have now a very strict lockdown in Israel, which apparently plays to the better because we are in a quite relatively, compared to other countries, relatively in a good situation. And what I say in this slide is that despite the strict lockdown, children in divorced families can move between the homes of mothers and fathers to maintain contact with them. The lockdown is very strict, and I don't know what is the situation in your state, but here we cannot move. We can go only 100 meters out of home just for relaxation. We can go and, do shopping and, buy medicine, and that's all. We are not supposed to move whatsoever. But some of the exceptions that the government decided, and I'm glad to share with you that to a large extent is based on what we know about attachment and about messages that were sent to the Prime Minister Netanyahu and the government, by the Bar Association of Lawyers, or family lawyers, who are heavily influenced by attachment theory, that they should allow children in divorced families to move between the homes of mothers and fathers. And this is really a very good news about the link between attachment theory and the public arena. And we can take it as a nice example. And just to end up, this is nice, to see what will happen when the quarantine will end. I guess this is amazing to end, to show the importance of touching, hugging, contact. It's wonderful. And just to make a note, this is my group of collaborators over the year, the Haifa group, and also my Dutch collaborators and my German collaborators. Together we managed to create all this volume of data, and I thank you very much, and looking forward to meeting you in the session in May 1st. And of course, keep safe, stay healthy, and do all the kind of necessary measures that we are all guided to ensure safety and health. So see you soon, May 1st. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.